We have a troublesome issue with births and birth rates. All Western economies do. Basically, as the standard of living goes up and as the equality between men and women go up, birth rates go down. Without commenting on the dynamics of that, that is just true. And so, we should celebrate that in the sense that, you want increasing equality, you want people to have more choice, etc., all these things. So how do you make up for the gap?
Hey folks, welcome back to CHAMMATH PALIHAPITIYA Zone. Before we move on to the video, don't forget to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure that the post notifications are turned on so that you never miss a video from us. Without further ado, let's dive in. According to census data, the population of the United States expanded at the slowest rate in history in 2021. Then there was 2020, which had one of the lowest rates of population increase in the United States ever. And now we have the year 2021 as a legitimate record holder. Growth in the US did not wane over time. The United States demographics were already slow in the 2010s. From 2011 to 2017, the country's population rose by only 2 million people per year. The United States grew by only 1.1 million people in 2020. That's about 393,000 people last year. Immigration, deaths, and births all contribute to the expansion or contraction of a country. The falling fertility rate in the United States is frequently in the news.
In 2021, after we had vaccines, which is a crazy thing to think about, we had 1 million deaths basically, right, because of COVID. So that's 1 million people that largely exited the workforce, plus or minus.
Journalists are concerned with the topic of why there aren't more babies in America, but it's the other two variables, death and immigration, that are mostly to blame for the United States' demographic decline. The pandemic has killed roughly 1 million Americans in the last 2 years. Sadly and surprisingly, the majority of those deaths occurred after we announced the approval of COVID vaccinations, indicating that they were concentrated in 2021. In a record number of countries across the United States, deaths outnumbered births last year. Never before in American history has a natural drop or the gap between deaths and births affected so many distinct sections of the country. Excess deaths were responsible for half of the difference in population increase between 2019 and 2021. This is a clear indication of the pandemic's terrible impact. However, even if we could have reduced excess COVID fatalities to zero, US population growth would have slowed to near historic lows. To understand why, we must consider the population equation's second variable, immigration. Net immigration to the United States peaked in 2016 at over 1 million persons. However, immigration has declined by roughly 75% since then, with numbers falling below 250,000 last year. In practically all of the hotspots for foreign-born migrants, such as New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, immigration dropped by more than half. This kind of decline might be attributed to economic causes. As Latin American economies have expanded, so has immigration. Some of it is epidemiological. COVID quarantines have slowed global immigration. However, the majority of this is due to American policies. The Trump administration prioritized not only illegal immigration, but also legal immigration. And maybe out of fear of a xenophobic backlash from the center and right, the Biden administration has not prioritized the resuscitation of pro-immigration policies. In almost every way, America's anti-immigration stance is self-defeating. Immigrants are propelling advancements in semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Do you want America to be more dynamic? Immigrants are responsible for about half of all billion-dollar startups in the United States. We slam the door in the faces while the rest of the world begs foreign geniuses to come to their borders. Because dropping fertility is a global trend, it's unlikely that we'll be able to reverse it by imitating another country's politics or culture. Rising female employment and education appear to be linked to global birth rates that are fast declining. This is a positive thing in pretty much every aspect you can think of. It strongly implies that women get more control over their bodies and lives as a result of economic and social growth. These ramifications of population expansion that is permanently slowed are numerous. Stagnant economies result from shrinking populations. Stagnant economies have bizarre cultural ramifications, such as zero-sum mentality, which makes it tougher to promote pro-growth policies. People in slow-growth areas, for example, may be scared of immigrants because they appear to pose a danger to scarce economic possibilities, despite the fact that immigration is the best way for these areas to develop their population and economy. The effects of diminishing population on a sector-by-sector basis would likewise become quite complex very quickly. Inflation is caused by money printing, which debases people's savings. When an economy is impacted by inflation, it first manifests itself in higher commodity and asset prices. Assets expand first, then consumer prices, and finally, if at all, wages inflate during all historical periods of inflation. When assets rise in value and wages remain stagnant, investing in markets become more difficult for ordinary people, but the wealthy become even wealthier as equities soar to new heights. When consumer prices rise while income remains stagnant, the poorest people bear the brunt of the consequences. They're gradually buying fewer products and services with the money they have saved. Now, debts and immigration, loss of workforce. How can we tackle the inflation? What does this signify in terms of the real world?
So how do you make up for the gap? Well, you make up for the gap in immigration. And the problem is that Trump closed the door, and Biden has not reopened the door.
While interest rate hikes might help fight inflation, they can also stifle the economic development by raising the cost of borrowing for anything from mortgages to car loans. Aside from the economic signals it may provide, the yields curves form has implications for consumers and businesses when short-term rates rise. Banks in the United States tend to boost their benchmark rates on a variety of consumer and commercial loans, including small business loans and credit cards, making borrowing more expensive for consumers. Mortgage rates are also on the rise. Banks can borrow money at lower interest rates and lend at higher interest rates as the yield curve steepens. When the curve is flatter, their margins are compressed, which may discourage lending. For a nation of immigrants, we may have an odd immigration policy, and it's a policy that's out of date in today's globe. Natural resources, industrial machines, and physical labor dominated the economy of the previous century. Many of these resources were zero-sum and under corporate control. You didn't have an oil field because someone else did. There were only so many oil fields to go around, and there was only so much money to be made from them. The economy of today is completely different. It's essentially based on renewable information and ideas, resources that are accessible to anyone. In contrast to oil fields, knowing something does not exclude you from knowing it as well. Indeed, the greater number of individuals who know something, the better educated and trained we all become, the more productive we become, and the better off everyone in our country can be. It has the potential to transform everything. The most valuable resources in a knowledge economy are the talented people we educate and recruit in our country. A knowledge economy can grow faster, create more jobs, and improve the standard of living for everyone in our country. We need the most talented and hardest working people in this new economy to lead the globe. We need to hire and train the best people. Those middle school pupils will be the leaders of tomorrow. Consider this. Why do we expel more than 40% of math and science graduate students who are not citizens of the United States after educating them? Why don't we allow entrepreneurs to come here if they have the skills to build businesses that will create more jobs? We need a new approach that includes comprehensive immigration reform that starts with strong border security, allows for a road to citizenship, and allows us to attract the brightest and hardest working people from all over the world. In schools, there should be higher standards and accountability, as well as support for effective teachers and a stronger emphasis on learning about science, technology, engineering, and math.
So immigration is really the only solution, and we don't really have the sponsorship to do that at a domestic policy level.
Investing in scientific breakthroughs and assurance that benefits of technologies belong to the general population, not just a select few. These kinds of changes aren't going to happen on their own. Let us embrace our future as a knowledge economy and work together to assist them, as well as all of us, achieve our full potential.